The phone vibrated against my desk, Brooke's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering, each ring matching the rapid beating of my heart. Some calls you know will change everything, even before you pick up. Anne, I need your help. My sister's voice carried that familiar tone, the one she'd used countless times since we were kids, the one that meant trouble was coming. I'm Anne, by the way, the responsible sister, the one who always had her homework done on time, who started working at 16, and who now runs a successful marketing agency, the one who's always been there to clean up Brooke's messes. What is it this time? I asked, already dreading the answer. I'm divorcing Xander. She paused for dramatic effect, something she'd perfected over the years. And I need you to help me pay for it. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. You want me to what? Come on, Anne, you know I don't have the money for a good lawyer. Edison Gray is the best divorce attorney in the city, but his retainer alone is $50,000. The numbers hit me like a physical blow. 50,000? Are you out of your mind? You have the money, she pressed. That big contract you just landed? Please, Annie. We're family. Family. The word she always wielded like a weapon when she wanted something. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk. 2 little girls at the beach, one with a bright smile, the other looking worried. Even then, I'd been cleaning up her sandcastles. I need to think about it, I said, hanging up before she could protest. My hands were shaking as I dialed Nancy's number. She picked up on the second ring. You won't believe what Brooke just asked me, I said. Oh God, what now? Nancy's voice was warm, concerned. She'd been my best friend since college, the sister I wished I had instead of the one I got. She wants me to pay for her divorce lawyer. $50,000, Nancy. $50,000. Please tell me you said no. I walked to my office window, watching the city bustle below. I said I'd think about it. Anne! Nancy's exasperation crackled through the phone. Remember the business loan she never paid back? The down payment for her car? The temporary help with her rent that lasted 6 months? I know. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. But she's my sister. And that's exactly why you need to say no. Meet me for lunch. We need to talk about this face to face. An hour later, I sat across from Nancy at our favorite cafe, picking at a salad I couldn't taste. Remember when she borrowed your prom dress and returned it with wine stains? Nancy asked, stabbing her fork into her pasta. Or when she dated that guy you liked in high school just because she could? That was years ago, I protested weakly. What about last Christmas? When she told everyone at dinner that your business was struggling right after you landed the Miller account? I winced at the memory. That particular lie had cost me 2 potential clients who'd been at the holiday party. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Brooke. Have you thought about it? Edison needs an answer today. Nancy reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Anne, look at me. You're not responsible for fixing her life. You never were. But what if she really needs help this time? Then she can get a loan, like everyone else. Or maybe ask herself why her husband wants to leave her in the first place. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a call from Xander, Brooke's soon-to-be ex. I stared at it, surprised. In 10 years of marriage to my sister, he'd never once called me directly. You should answer that, Nancy said, raising an eyebrow. I did, putting it on speaker. Xander? Anne, I'm glad I caught you. His voice was tired, strained. Has Brooke asked you for money yet? She has. Don't give it to her, please. There's something you need to know about why we're really getting divorced. I looked at Nancy, whose eyes had gone wide. I'm listening, I said, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. Sometimes the truth comes in waves, and I could feel this one building, ready to crash over everything I thought I knew about my sister. She's been planning this for months, Xander's voice crackled through the speaker. The divorce, the money, everything. I found emails between her and Edison from 6 months ago. Nancy and I exchanged looks across the table. My salad sat forgotten, wilting in its bowl. What kind of emails? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Strategy emails, about how to maximize the settlement, about... He hesitated. About using you as a backup funding source if things got tight. The cafe around us suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. I switched off the speaker and pressed the phone to my ear, walking outside for privacy. Nancy followed, concern etched on her face. There's more, Xander continued. She's been moving money around, hiding assets, making it look like she's broke when she's not. The jewelry she told everyone she sold last year, it's in a safety deposit box, along with about $30,000 in cash. My free hand clenched into a fist. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm tired, Anne. Tired of the games, the manipulation. And honestly, I feel guilty. I've watched her use you for years, and I never said anything. I should have. After hanging up, I turned to Nancy, who'd been waiting patiently. We need to go to my office. I need to check something. 20 minutes later, I was digging through my filing cabinet, pulling out folders of financial records. Nancy sat in my client chair, watching as I spread papers across my desk. Here, I said, pointing to a bank statement from 3 years ago. The business loan she never paid back? She told me she used it to pay off medical bills. But look at this. I pulled up my email on my computer, scanning through old messages. The same week I gave her the money, she took a 2-week vacation to Bali, posted all about it on social media, but told me she was staying with our aunt in Florida. Classic Brooke, Nancy muttered. Always living her best life on someone else's dime. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Brooke. Edison needs an answer now. Don't you care about family at all? You know what? I said, straightening up. I do care about family. That's why I'm done enabling her. I called Lewis, my business lawyer, and explained the situation. He listened quietly, then said, I can help, but you need to be prepared. This could get ugly. It's already ugly, I replied. I just didn't want to see it before. That evening, I met Brooke at her favorite restaurant, an overpriced place where she always conveniently forgot her wallet. She was already seated, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Finally, she exclaimed as I sat down. Did you transfer the money yet? Edison's waiting. I placed my phone on the table, recording app running quietly as Louis had suggested. No, I haven't, and I won't be doing that. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? Anne, I need this. You know how Xander is with money. I'll pay you back, I promise. Like you paid back the business loan? Or the car down payment? Or the rent money? Her eyes narrowed. That's different. I was struggling then. Were you struggling in Bali? The color drained from her face. What? 3 years ago, when you told me you needed money for medical bills, but you were actually on a luxury vacation. Remember that? You're being ridiculous, she scoffed, but her hands were shaking as she reached for her water glass. This is about my future, Anne, my divorce. Don't you want me to be happy? I want you to be honest. For once in your life, just be honest. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. Fine. You want honest? I need this money because I deserve it. I've put up with Xander for 10 years. I deserve a payout. And if you won't help me get it, then you're not the sister I thought you were. I stood up, gathering my things. You're right about one thing. I'm not the sister you thought I was. Not anymore. As I walked away, she called after me. You'll regret this, Anne. Family is supposed to help family. I turned back one last time. Yes, they are. But family isn't supposed to exploit family either. I have the emails, Brooke. I know about the planning, the hidden assets, everything. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to that mediation meeting, but not to help you. I'm going to make sure the truth comes out. The look of shock on her face was worth every penny I'd ever lost to her schemes. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones we need the most. The next morning I sat in Lewis's office, surrounded by stacks of documents. My lawyer peered at me over his reading glasses, his expression grave. These emails from Xander are damning, he said, tapping the papers spread across his desk. But we need more. Your sister's smart. She's covered her tracks well. What about this? I pulled out my phone, playing the recording from last night's dinner. Louis listened intently, then smiled. That's a start, but we need concrete evidence of the hidden assets. Bank statements, property records, anything that shows she's lying about her financial situation. I might know where to look, I said, remembering something from years ago. She always kept important documents at our parents' old house. Said it was safer than a bank. That afternoon, I drove to the suburban house where we grew up. Our parents had passed away 2 years ago, but we'd kept the house, unable to agree on selling it. Brooke had been living there rent-free, of course. The spare key was still under the loose brick by the garage. Inside, the house smelled of expensive candles and neglect. Designer bags littered the floor, tags still attached, while bills sat unopened on the kitchen counter. I headed straight for our father's old study. The bottom drawer of his desk had always been Brooke's hiding place. It took some jimmying with a letter opener, but it finally creaked open. "Bingo," I whispered, pulling out a thick manila envelope. My phone rang. Nancy. "You won't believe what I just found out," she said without preamble. "Remember Maria from accounting? She handled Brooke's taxes last year. Says Brooke claimed massive losses on a business that doesn't exist." I sat down hard in our father's old chair. Tax fraud? Among other things. Maria's willing to provide documentation, legally, of course. She said she's always felt guilty about helping hide the numbers. The manila envelope in my hands suddenly felt heavier. Inside, I found bank statements showing regular deposits to offshore accounts, documentation for the safety deposit box Xander had mentioned, and, most surprisingly, paperwork for a small property in Vermont I'd never known about. "She bought a house?" I muttered, scanning the documents. "With what money?" My phone buzzed with a text from Brooke. "Mom and Dad would be so disappointed in you right now." Before I could respond, another text came through. "But there's still time to fix this. Help me with the divorce settlement, and all of this goes away." I called Nancy back immediately. "She's trying to blackmail me now. Says Mom and Dad would be disappointed." "Your parents would be proud of you for finally standing up to her," Nancy said firmly. "Remember what your dad always said about integrity?" "It's the only thing you can't buy back once you've sold it," I quoted, tears pricking at my eyes. A noise downstairs made me freeze. The front door opened and closed. "Someone's here," I whispered into the phone. "I have to go." I quickly stuffed the documents into my bag and crept to the study door. Brooke's voice drifted up the stairs, along with another I recognized, Edison Gray, her divorce lawyer. "The house is empty," Brooke was saying. "We can talk freely." I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding. "Your sister's interference is becoming problematic," Edison said, his voice cold. "If she shows up at the mediation with evidence." "She won't," Brooke interrupted. "I know how to handle Anne. She's always been soft. A few tears, some guilt about Mom and Dad, and she'll back down. You better be right, because if this goes south, we're both in trouble. Tax fraud isn't a game, Brooke." I pulled out my phone and started recording, hands shaking. "Nobody can prove anything," Brooke said confidently. "The offshore accounts are untraceable. The property's in my friend's name, and Anne's too naive to dig deep enough." "And the safety deposit box?" "Emptied it this morning, moved everything to a new location. Trust me, Edison, I've thought of everything." I'd heard enough. Carefully, silently, I made my way to the back stairs, the ones we'd used as kids to sneak out to parties. Every step felt like an eternity, but finally, I made it outside. In my car, I sat shaking for a full minute before calling Louis. "I've got it," I said. "Everything we need and more." "Come to my office now," he replied. "And Anne, be careful. People who commit fraud don't like getting caught." As I drove away, I caught sight of Brooke in my rearview mirror, standing at the front door. She was watching my car disappear, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one afraid of what would happen next. Louis spread the documents across his conference room table like he was dealing cards in a high-stakes poker game. Each piece of evidence, the bank statements, property deed, recorded conversations, represented another nail in Brooke's carefully constructed coffin of lies. "This is better than I expected," he said, holding up the recording from our parents' house. "Tax fraud, hidden assets, conspiracy with her lawyer. She's given us everything we need." "So what's our next move?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We go nuclear." Louis leaned back in his chair. "But first, you need to understand something. This isn't just about the divorce anymore. What we've uncovered here, it's criminal. Are you prepared for what that means?" Before I could answer, my phone lit up with Xander's name. Put him on speaker, Louis instructed. Anne, Xander's voice filled the room. Brooke just left me a threatening voicemail. She knows you were at the house. What exactly did she say? That if I helped you any further, she'd make sure I lost everything. She mentioned something about fabricated evidence of embezzlement from my company. Louis's eyebrows shot up. Mr. Riley, would you be willing to provide that voicemail to us? That's why I'm calling. I'm done being afraid of her. I'll send everything I have. After the call ended, Louis turned to me. The mediation is in 2 days. Brooke and Edison think they're walking into a simple negotiation. Instead, they're walking into an ambush. What about Brooke's threat to frame Xander? Already handled. Louis pulled out another document. I had my investigator do some digging. Guess who else is under investigation by the IRS? Edison Gray. He's been helping clients hide assets for years. One phone call to the right people, and his whole house of cards comes down. A knock at the door interrupted us. Nancy walked in, carrying a thick folder. Maria came through, she announced, placing the folder on the table. 3 years of doctored tax returns, plus emails between Brooke and Edison discussing how to hide the fraud. Louis picked up the folder like it was made of gold. This is exactly what we needed. Ms. White, you've been a tremendous help. That's what friends are for, Nancy said, squeezing my shoulder. Speaking of which, Anne, you need to see this. She pulled out her phone, showing me a social media post from Brooke from just an hour ago, a photo of us as children, with a long emotional caption about family loyalty and forgiveness. She's trying to control the narrative, Louis observed. Classic manipulation tactic. The question is, how do you want to respond? I stared at the photo. 2 little girls, one always protecting the other. I don't, I said finally. Let her think she's winning. In 2 days, she'll learn what real consequences feel like. Speaking of consequences, Louis said, I've arranged for a representative from the IRS to be present at the mediation. They're very interested in what we've uncovered. My hands started shaking again. This is really happening, isn't it? It is, Nancy said softly. Are you ready? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with another text from Brooke. Last chance, little sister. Back off now, or I'll make sure everyone knows how you really got the Miller account. Louis read the message over my shoulder. Another threat. She's getting desperate. The Miller account? Nancy frowned. But that was all you. You worked months on that proposal. Brooke knows that, I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. She's bluffing. She's always bluffing, and I'm done falling for it. I typed out a response. See you at the mediation. Louis gathered the documents into a briefcase. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we do a full run-through of how this will play out. And Anne, remember, you're not the bad guy here. You're just finally letting the truth come to light. As Nancy and I walked to our cars, she grabbed my arm. You know she's going to try something else before the mediation, right? This is Brooke we're talking about. I know, I replied, looking up at the darkening sky. But for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of what she might do. I'm more afraid of what will happen if I let her keep doing this to people. Proud of you, Nancy said, hugging me tight. Driving home, I passed by our parents' house. The lights were on, and I could see Brooke's silhouette in the window. For a moment, I was tempted to stop, to give her one last chance to come clean. Instead, I drove on, remembering Dad's words about integrity. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions. In 2 days, Brooke would finally face hers. The mediation room felt smaller than I expected. Brooke sat across the large oak table, Edison beside her, both radiating confidence. Xander and his lawyer were to my right, Louis to my left. The mediator, a stern-faced woman named Patricia, sat at the head of the table. 2 people in dark suits sat quietly in the corner, the IRS representatives Louis had arranged for. Brooke hadn't even glanced their way. Before we begin, Edison said smoothly, I think we should address the elephant in the room. Ms. Ann's presence here is irregular and potentially disruptive to these proceedings. My client has every right to be here, Louis responded, his voice calm. She's been financially involved in this matter. Brooke's eyes met mine. She smiled, that same smile she'd used countless times before when she thought she had the upper hand. "Of course," Brooke said sweetly. "My sister has always been there for me. Haven't you, Anne?" Patricia cleared her throat. "Let's begin with the asset declaration. Mrs. Riley, you've claimed limited financial resources and are seeking substantial support. Is that correct?" "Yes," Brooke replied, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Xander controlled all our finances. I have nothing." Louis slid a folder across the table. "Interesting perspective. Patricia, would you please review these documents?" The mediator opened the folder, her eyebrows rising as she read. "Mrs. Riley, can you explain these offshore account statements?" Brooke's smile faltered. "What statements?" "The ones showing regular deposits totaling over $200,000, Patricia continued. "Or perhaps you'd like to explain the property in Vermont." Edison leaned forward. "I object to these unsubstantiated accusations." "They're quite substantiated," Louis interrupted, passing more documents around. "As are the fraudulent tax returns, the hidden safety deposit box contents, and the recorded conversations about concealing assets." The color drained from Brooke's face. She turned to Edison, who had gone very still. "Is there something you'd like to share with us, Mrs. Riley?" Patricia asked. "This is ridiculous," Brooke snapped. "Anne is just jealous. She's always been jealous. Tell them, Xander. Tell them I never had access to any money." Xander cleared his throat. "Actually, I have something to add." He pulled out his phone and pressed play. Brooke's voice filled the room, threatening to frame him for embezzlement. The IRS representative stood up, moving closer to the table. "This is harassment," Edison declared, standing abruptly. "We're leaving." "Sit down, Mr. Gray," one of the IRS agents said. "We have some questions about your involvement in this tax fraud scheme." Brooke's composure cracked. "You can't prove anything. Anne, tell them you're lying. Tell them." Her voice rose hysterically. "I'm your sister." "Yes, you are," I said quietly. "And that's why this hurts so much. But I have proof of everything. The emails planning this divorce 6 months ago, the fake business losses, the hidden jewelry, even the conversation you had with Edison at Mom and Dad's house about moving the safety deposit box contents." "You were spying on me?" she shrieked. "No, Brooke, I was finally paying attention." Edison turned to Brooke, his face livid. "You said nobody knew about those conversations. You said everything was untraceable." "Mr. Gray," the second IRS agent cut in, "we've been investigating your practice for months. This case just gave us everything we needed." Patricia cleared her throat again. "Given these revelations, this mediation is suspended pending criminal investigation. Mrs. Riley, Mr. Gray, I suggest you both contact criminal defense attorneys immediately." Brooke stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This isn't fair. Anne, you can't do this to me. I'm your family." "Family doesn't commit fraud," I replied. "Family doesn't blackmail each other. Family doesn't spend years taking advantage of each other's love." "I hate you," she spat, tears streaming down her face. "You've ruined everything." "No, Brooke, you did that yourself." As the IRS agents began their formal questioning, I walked out of the room. My hands were shaking, but my steps were steady. Nancy was waiting in the hallway. "How did it go?" she asked, pulling me into a hug. "Exactly as planned," I whispered, finally letting my own tears fall. "But it doesn't feel like winning." "It's not supposed to," she said softly, "but it's still the right thing." Through the door, I could hear Brooke's voice rising in panic as the agents read her rights. The sister who had once seemed invincible was finally facing reality, and despite everything, my heart ached for her. But as Dad always said, integrity was something you couldn't buy back once you'd sold it. Today, I'd kept mine intact, even if it meant watching my sister lose everything she'd built on lies. The news spread fast. By evening, my phone was flooded with messages from family members and old friends. Some supported me, others condemned me, but I couldn't bring myself to respond to any of them. I sat in my office, staring at my computer screen without seeing it, when Xander knocked on my door. "Can I come in?" he asked, looking as exhausted as I felt. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat down heavily, loosening his tie. "They're holding her overnight," he said. "Edison, too. The IRS found even more than we knew about." "How much more?" Properties in 3 different countries, shell companies, years of tax evasion. He ran a hand through his hair. I knew she was lying to me, but I had no idea how deep it went. My phone buzzed, a text from our Aunt Margaret. How could you do this to your own sister? Your mother would be heartbroken. I turned the phone face down. Did I do the right thing? You want to know something funny? Xander leaned forward. The day I met Brooke, she was running a charity scam at our college, collecting money for a fake children's hospital. I caught her, but instead of turning her in, I asked her out. Why? Because she was exciting, dangerous. Everything in my boring life wasn't. He laughed bitterly. 10 years later, I'm potentially facing an audit because my wife used my company documents for her schemes. A knock at the door interrupted us. Nancy walked in with 3 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, she said, handing them out. The local news just picked up the story. They're calling it Divorce Fraud Scheme Exposed. Great, I muttered. More publicity. Anne, Xander said suddenly, there's something else you should know. Last week, Brooke tried to access your company's financial records. She was planning to frame you for embezzlement if today went wrong. The coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. What? My IT guy caught her trying to hack into the system. We have the evidence if you need it. Nancy sat down next to me. She really would have destroyed you to save herself. Ms. Holmes? Lewis appeared in the doorway. The IRS agents would like to speak with you again. They have some questions about other potential victims of your sister's schemes. I stood up on shaky legs. Other victims? Apparently, you weren't the only one she manipulated for money. They've identified at least 12 other people. Friends, colleagues, even her therapist. As I followed Lewitt out, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Anne? Brooke's voice was small, broken. They're letting me make one phone call. I stopped walking. What do you want, Brooke? I need you to post bail. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but... No. Annie, please! I'm your sister! I'm scared. For the first time in my life, her tears didn't move me. You should be scared, Brooke. What you did was criminal, and I won't help you avoid the consequences anymore. I'll tell them you knew everything, she threatened, her voice turning hard. I'll say you were part of it. Go ahead. I have nothing to hide. I ended the call. Louis was watching me carefully. Are you okay? No, I admitted, but I will be. Back in the conference room, the IRS agents had spread out dozens of documents. Each one told a story of manipulation, fraud, and betrayal. As I looked at them, I realized something. This wasn't just about Brooke anymore. This was about every person she'd ever taken advantage of. Ms. Holmes, one agent said, we need to discuss the Vermont property. Your sister used your social security number on some of the documentation. Identity theft, too? I wasn't even surprised anymore. We'll need you to file a formal statement, and there may be more victims we haven't identified yet. Nancy squeezed my hand under the table as I began to tell them everything I knew. Each word felt like both a betrayal and a liberation. Hours later, as I finally drove home, I passed our parents' house again. The lights were off now, the building dark and empty, just like all of Brooke's promises had been. My phone buzzed one last time, a text from Brooke. I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed our family. I didn't respond. Some messages don't deserve answers, and some bridges need to burn so we can't cross them again. The preliminary hearing was set for a Tuesday morning. I sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as Brooke was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, a far cry from her usual designer clothes. Edison sat separately with his own lawyer, refusing to even look at her. Nancy squeezed my arm as Brooke's new public defender stood up. Your Honor, he began, my client wishes to enter a plea of not guilty to all charges. The prosecutor, a sharp-looking woman named Rachel, stood next. Your Honor, we have overwhelming evidence of multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, identity theft, and conspiracy. Ms. Riley's actions have affected dozens of victims. Alleged victims! Brooke suddenly shouted, turning to face the courtroom. Her eyes locked onto mine. This is all because my sister is jealous. She's always been jealous. Ms. Riley, the judge warned, control yourself or you'll be removed. Xander leaned forward from his seat beside me. I've never seen her like this, he whispered. Because she's never been caught before, I replied. The hearing continued with the prosecution laying out their evidence. Each new revelation made me sink lower in my seat. Forged documents, stolen identities, bank accounts opened in other people's names. The scope of Brooke's deception was staggering. During a brief recess, an elderly woman approached me in the hallway. "Are you Anne?" she asked, her hands trembling. "I'm Margaret Wilson, your sister. She took my retirement savings, said she was investing it in a special fund." My stomach churned. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be, dear. You're the one who stopped her." She patted my hand. Some of us had given up hope of ever seeing justice. Back in the courtroom, Edison's lawyer requested a separate trial for his client. Mr. Gray was unaware of the full extent of Ms. Riley's activities, he claimed. "That's a lie." Brooke jumped up again. "Edison knew everything. He helped me plan it all." "Remove the defendant," the judge ordered as Brooke continued shouting. "Anne, tell them this isn't fair. Tell them you're lying about everything." As guards let her out, she locked eyes with me one last time. For a moment, I saw something I'd never seen before in my sister's eyes: genuine fear. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around the steps. Rachel, the prosecutor, pulled me aside. "We're offering her a deal," she said quietly. "If she cooperates, testifies against Edison, and helps us recover the stolen assets, we'll recommend a lighter sentence." "Will she take it?" "Her lawyer's strongly advising her to. Without it, she's looking at 15 to 20 years. My phone buzzed, a text from our Aunt Margaret. "Just saw the news. I owe you an apology. Your mother would be proud of you for standing up for what's right." Nancy appeared with coffee. "You okay?" "No," I admitted. "I keep thinking about all those people she hurt. Mrs. Wilson lost her retirement savings. How many others are there?" "That's not on you," Nancy said firmly. "Ms. Holmes?" A court officer approached. "Your sister's asking to speak with you. Private meeting, with lawyers present." I followed him to a small conference room. Brooke sat at the table, her handcuffs creating a metallic sound as she fidgeted. "5 minutes," her lawyer said. Brooke waited until I sat down. "They're offering me a deal." "I know. If I take it, will you speak at my sentencing? Ask for leniency?" I studied her face, the face I'd grown up with, the face I'd trusted for so long. Why should I? "Because I'm sorry." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt people, but I'm still your sister." "Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught?" She didn't answer. "That's what I thought." I stood up. "Take the deal, Brooke. Help make things right for the people you hurt. That's the only way forward." "And what about us?" she asked as I reached the door. "Will we ever be okay?" I turned back one last time. "That depends on whether you finally learn to tell the truth, to yourself most of all." Outside, Xander was waiting with Nancy. "How'd it go?" he asked. "She'll take the deal," I said. "She always takes the easy way out." As we walked down the courthouse steps, reporters called out questions. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the clear blue sky ahead. Sometimes the hardest part of doing the right thing is living with the aftermath. But at least I could face my reflection in the mirror now. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Lewis. "Mrs. Wilson wants to know if you'll help organize a support group for the victims." I smiled slightly. Maybe some good could come from all this pain after all. The victims support group met in my office conference room every Thursday evening. Tonight, Mrs. Wilson sat at the head of the table, sharing her story with 3 new members. I lingered in the doorway, listening. "The hardest part wasn't losing the money," she said. "It was losing faith in people. But then Anne showed us that one person's courage can make a difference." My phone vibrated, the prison's number. I stepped into my office to answer it. "The prosecutor accepted my cooperation," Brooks said without greeting. "Edison's going away for 12 years. I got 5, with possibility of parole in 3. "That's good," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. They're making me pay everything back. I'll be in debt forever. Better than your victim staying in debt forever. She was quiet for a moment. I found Mom's old diary and my belongings they brought to the prison. Did you know she wrote about us? My throat tightened. What did she write? That she worried about me, that she saw what I was becoming but didn't know how to stop it. Her voice cracked. She wrote that you were the strong one, not me. I always thought it was the other way around. A knock at my door interrupted us. Nancy stood there with Louis, both holding documents. I have to go, I told Brooke. Wait, the support group you started, do you think maybe when I get out? Let's focus on you getting better first, I said, and hung up. Louis placed a folder on my desk. The court approved the victim restitution plan. Your sister's assets will be liquidated and distributed proportionally. And the house? I asked. As co-owner, you have the right to sell it. The proceeds can help compensate the victims. Nancy sat down across from me. Have you been inside since that day? No, but I need to. There are things, memories that need dealing with. An hour later, we stood in front of our childhood home. The key felt heavy in my hand. Inside, everything was exactly as Brooke had left it. Designer clothes still scattered around, unpaid bills on the counter. But now there were boxes everywhere, marked with evidence tags. In Dad's study, I found what I was looking for, the family photo albums. As I pulled them from the shelf, an envelope fell out. Inside was a letter in Mom's handwriting, dated just weeks before she died. My dearest Anne, it began. If you're reading this, you finally found your strength. I always knew you would. Your sister casts a long shadow, but you were never meant to live in it. Your father and I saw how you protected her, covered for her, tried to save her from herself. But sometimes love means letting people face their own consequences. Tears blurred my vision. Nancy took the letter, reading it aloud as I sank into Dad's old chair. Your compassion is your strength, she continued reading, but don't let it become your weakness. The truth will hurt, but lies hurt more in the end. We love you both, but you're the one who inherited your father's integrity. A noise from the doorway made us look up. Xander stood there with a small box. Found these in the master bedroom, he said softly, placing it on the desk. Inside were photos of Brooke and me as children, before everything went wrong, before the lies began. What are you going to do with all this? Nancy asked, gesturing around the study. I picked up one of the photos, 2 little girls building sandcastles, one protecting the other's creation from the waves. Keep the memories worth keeping, I said. Let go of the rest. Help the people she hurt heal, and maybe, someday, help her heal too. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Wilson. The new members are asking if you'll share your story tonight. I looked at Nancy, then at Xander, then at Mom's letter. Yes, I typed back. It's time. Standing up, I gathered the photos and letter. The setting sun cast long shadows through the study windows, but for the first time since this all began, I wasn't afraid of shadows anymore. You know what Dad always said about shadows? I asked as we headed downstairs. What's that? Nancy smiled, already knowing the answer. They only have power when you turn your back to the light. Outside, the support group members were arriving for the evening meeting. Mrs. Wilson waved from her car, and 2 other victims walked up the street together, chatting like old friends. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to, but who you choose to become. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it breaks your heart to do so. I locked the front door one last time, ready to face whatever came next. After all, I had nothing left to hide, and nothing left to fear.